Welcome back to all our viewers here at Values University. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Yael Eckstein, President and CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Yael, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. Just to start, we'll dive into Ukraine in a bit, but would you mind just sharing with our viewers a bit about your organization and what you guys do, some of your work?
Sure. So the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews was actually started by my father, Rabbi Yael Eckstein of blessed memory, almost 40 years ago. And my father was a young rabbi. He just got ordained by Rav Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University, and he was sent to Skokie, Illinois, to gather support against the Nazi March. And it was there, to make a really long story short, that he saw for the first time in history the Jewish people have friends who want to stand side by side with us in the Christian community. And after kind of telling this to the world, telling this to the Jewish world, wanting to really dedicate his life to it, and people saying he was crazy, he was a heretic, he was lots of horrible things, he decided to go off on his own, start the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which today is the largest philanthropic organization in Israel, raising over $200 million annually from over 600,000, mostly evangelical Christian donors.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Great work, very important, always interfaith cooperation and dialogue. I'm a big fan. I hold this portfolio at UCR as well. To dive in, I was looking into your website in preparation for the interview, and I saw that you actually have boots on the ground. You have staff members who are on the ground assisting the most vulnerable. Why is it so important to the IFCJ to support refugees? What values stemming from your normal day-to-day work prompted you guys to want to get involved, to want to assist?
Well, I think that it's very important to be focused in order to make a larger impact. And the fellowship is very focused as far as our mission, what we raise more money for, and what we distribute money for. And that's really to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the poor, that we're focused on this basic needs niche. That it's really interesting because up until, I'd say, Corona struck, people didn't realize the value in distributing basic needs. The world of philanthropy progressed to investing in art and in different sorts of ROI when you talk about philanthropic giving, investing in individuals for scholarships or to a new science lab. And all those things are amazing, not to undermine the importance of any of those things. But it was always very important to my father that we stayed committed to those core values that unite the Jewish and Christian community in shared values and giving and strategic partnerships, which was going back to the basics. That's not political. That's not complicated. Of everyone, the hungry deserves to be fed. And if you're in a position to be able to feed the hungry, then it's a privilege to be able to do so. And those orphans who don't have anyone else and need a home, if you're in a position to help them, then it's a privilege to be able to do so. So up until Corona crisis, people really thought, okay, this is kind of short-sighted, that instead of helping the orphans, instead of bringing food to the elderly, let's invest more in scholarships for the next generation. And when Corona struck, what we saw was there weren't many people who were able in this kind of really strategic, effective way to distribute basic needs to the masses when so many people were suddenly in poverty. So I guess there are a lot of values around this, in short. The value of dignity, human dignity, that everything doesn't have to be so complicated. Everything doesn't have to be so intellectual, looking for that long-term ROI of what can produce the next person who's going to cure cancer. Not that that's not important, but going back sometimes to the simplicity and making sure an elderly Holocaust survivor has a meal, that pure dignity of giving to someone without the long-term strategic value necessarily could often actually be a long-term strategic value, because more society helps the weak and helps sustain the elderly and the orphans and those who can't help themselves, I believe the stronger the entire society is. So that goes back to bridge building, it goes back to dignity, it goes back to seeing the individual. And of course, now with the refugee crisis and everything that's happening in the former Soviet Union, we see again that, as we say in Hebrew, that dagesh, that emphasis on the need for going back to the individual and being able to help the individual with basic needs in a larger strategic professional, according to criteria and according to effectiveness type of way.
Very, very important points. I think as of this morning, High Commissioner noted 2.6 or 2.5 million refugees already fled across international borders, and that's not to mention, of course, the internally displaced within Ukraine. Refugees as a group are already extremely vulnerable, and of course, minority groups within refugees. This may just further the vulnerability of certain populations. Talking about specifically Jewish individuals who are fleeing, some are making their way to Israel. Is your organization having a specific focus on the Jewish refugees fleeing Ukraine, and what are some of their needs?
So not a lot of people know that in Ukraine before the war, there were still 200,000 Jewish people. And a lot of these, the Jewish community in Ukraine were very weak. You have the Holocaust survivors, and then you have the second generation, even third generation following the Holocaust. And the fellowship has been involved in providing basic needs to the Jewish community in Ukraine for over 30 years. So I've been going for over 16 years, at least once a year, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, to see the situation. I always go in January or February. And everyone always says, Yael, why are you going to Ukraine specifically in January or February? Can't you go in June when the weather is a little bit nicer? And what I always say is that I want to see the needs during the hardest months. And what I see there, what I've seen there in the past, is Holocaust survivors and many others living without any running water in their house. You have elderly who are growing their own vegetables, that's what they're, and then they're pickling it for the winter, and that's what they're living off of. The stipend, the government stipend for pension hasn't changed since communism. It's around $67 a month, but it's a regular European country that has prices like anywhere else in Europe. That there have been so many people falling between the cracks, elderly specific is what we focus on, and orphans within Ukraine and the former Soviet Union, that it's really by having this infrastructure set up that we get the needs to the people directly, but according to criteria, according to strategy, according to volunteers on the ground, that we've been able to mobilize immediately as soon as the war broke out, that within the refugee crisis, we're able to have right now in Moldova, for example, the fellowship has, together with our partners, of course, the JDC and Chabad and Jewish Agency, we have over 1,400 beds for refugees in Moldova, and a whole model that's working. I mean, we're less than 2 weeks into this war, and we already have Aliyah flights to Israel twice a day. So the airport in Moldova is closed right now. We got special humanitarian permission that the fellowship flies airplanes from Israel into Moldova. We're the only airplane that's landing there. We pack in over 150 Olim, Jewish immigrants, to Israel, fly them to Israel. We pack that flight with humanitarian aid, send it back to Moldova, where the humanitarian aid is then distributed across the border in Ukraine, and bring back more Jewish immigrants to Israel. So there are 3 areas that we're seeing right now that need a special focus. One is on caring for the weakest of the population inside of Ukraine, who still need the food and medicine that they needed before the war broke out, and even more so now. The second is evacuating them and putting them up at refugee centers. And the third is bringing them to Israel. And so, yeah, as the Jewish population there is often historically the weakest link, that you look through history in the former Soviet Union or anywhere where there's war, and you see the Jewish community specifically were the ones who were neglected, had nowhere to go, not wanted. I think it's an amazing point in history where to be Jewish means you have a homeland and a place to go.
Mhm. Of course, and such important efforts. And there's something about the Israeli, I don't know what it is, but they always managed to get where they need to be, and so organize in a way that many people struggle. That's amazing and good to hear. Mm, Focusing, I mean, this is a great development. We also see neighboring countries, opening their borders. Poland, of course, best practice. Over 1 million refugees already. We actually had Consul General in New York, Adrian Kubitsky, on the program last week, speaking about the willingness of the Polish people to welcome so many refugees. It's really heartwarming. Mm, Looking at the current situation, we did have, even just a few months ago, quite a difficult time in a European context, but also a global context with refugees from different conflicts. Uh, One of the key messages, we always say, or those of us with the refugee background, is, we're not just supporting because we're following the law. It's our value, and you never know when it's your turn. You're not a refugee until you are. It's not who you are. It's a context, and I think it's very, very prevalent, especially within Europe, to see so many refugees in 2022. I think it's a bit shocking to people. Do you think we had a rude awakening? Do you think this is going to affect the way that European countries or Western countries in general react to refugees in the future?
I think what's most shocking with this refugee crisis, for me personally, is that they look like me, is that they look like my children. They're crossing the border with iPhones and with new purses and with shoes that they probably bought last week at the mall and ear pods in. You're not dealing with a refugee crisis like what you imagine after World War II or in a culture that you can't necessarily relate to.
Mhm.
I think this has shook up the Western world because they look like people from the Western world. What do the refugees look like today? They have ear pods in their ears and they're carrying their iPhone and they are crossing over in Uggs, but that's all they have. They have nothing else. And in an instant, everything in their life was turned around. And so I hope it's an awakening that we obviously, it's an awakening that everyone, even if we can't necessarily relate to the same culture or they're not wearing Ugg boots and ear pods, that it could be us, that it could be our children, that it makes us realize that refugees aren't some far theoretical, can't relate to concept, but they're individual people like all of us. And the same way this happened in Ukraine in an instant, we have so many refugees from Syria. I mean, how could we forget about that refugee crisis that happened not too long ago? And you look at all across the world that I think for the Western world, this was the closest to home that we've had in a long time. But I hope it will serve as a wake up call to help all of the refugees that are in need with the basics. I mean, anyone fleeing their home with nothing but the clothing on their back deserve our heart, deserve our prayers, deserve our help with the basics. And I think that goes back also when you talk about core values. This idea of partnership. One of the core values of the fellowship is partnerships. And it's partnerships in so many different areas. It's partnerships, of course, between the Christian and Jewish community coming together in these shared values to say, we aren't going to even discuss politics. The fellowship has we are completely non-political, even when it comes to Israel, which is our mission. We're humanitarian in Israel. We're humanitarian for the Jewish people. We don't get involved in the politics surrounding it. So when there are elections, for example, Christian donors will call us and say, who's the best candidate for Israel? And we'll say, you have to pray about it and decide. We're not going to go there. And so, of course, there's that partnership between the Jewish and Christian community and these core values of providing humanitarian aid for those who need it. In Israel, we have over 400 projects that are with partner organizations that together we're implementing our strategy of feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the poor, whether it's with hospitals or with orphanages or with the Israeli government. Without being political, we work together in order to get the aid on the ground. And what we're seeing now within this crisis is there are around 7 main Jewish organizations on the ground in Ukraine that help these 200,000 Jews inside of Ukraine. And what we saw, which is for me, I mean, just a small light within the darkness, and there have been many moments of this small light within the darkness, is that all these organizations have come together for the first time in history. It's always been, as I've said, the organizational ego is dead. We're focused together now on saving lives. And so every day we have WhatsApp messages going back and forth from one organization to the next. I need food in I need food in Kiev. Could someone bring food in Kiev? And in Odessa, I actually have medicine. If anyone else needs medicine, I could give them medicine in Odessa. And in this city, we have some cash. If someone could come and bring us, a home care worker for the elderly, that would be wonderful. And through this partnership, we've been able every single day to save dozens, if not hundreds of lives. And so, as we talk about the refugee crisis and the world, I think this idea of partnership, working together, having this core value of knowing what you're trying to do, which is to save lives, to help individuals. If you don't have that partnership, then it's going to be a lot harder, I think, now, and especially moving forward with what we're going to deal with.
Yes, of course. I think estimates from here in Geneva is 5 million, more or less, in the coming weeks. And that's, people get mixed with the numbers. We also had 5 million from Syria, but they didn't all come to Europe. Most of them remained in Turkey and so on and so forth. We have a very difficult situation ahead, a very difficult time for all of us. And I think that's so important, the value of partnership. Unfortunately, there's nothing like a war to bring us all together, but we shouldn't have to come to this situation before we learn the importance of cooperation, listening to each other, supporting each other as a global community. We could prevent similar situations like this from happening in the first place. Yael, it was a pleasure speaking with you. If someone wants to support your work, if they want to volunteer, donate money, how do they support the IFCJ?
Thank you so much. So you go to our website, www.ifcj.org, or just Google International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And to keep up on the day-to-day activities that we have on the border of Ukraine, inside of Ukraine, in Israel, with all the different aspects, you can follow me at Yael Eckstein on any of the social media platforms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Again, Yael Eckstein, the President and CEO of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Thank you for joining us on the program, Yael.
It's been my honor. Thank you.
All right, and we'll cut it there.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Good luck. I mean, I'm probably coming. I'm on the short list to be deployed to Ukraine. So if you need, if you need any help, I'll be there. And Israel Aid Europe is my dear friend Gal Rahman, and he's in Ukraine now. So
right, we've been working with them.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. So if I can be of any help, or you need a contact, or you need a UN liaison or something, just shoot me a message and I'll see what I can do. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And lots of luck. Most importantly, stay safe. Yeah, you too. And kol hakavod, really, for everything you're doing. Thank you so much. All right, yeah. Ciao. Bye.